Alright, so this is the pre-trip inspection. There are all of your components. You need to point out two things. You need to name the component and then tell what you are going to be looking for. The two acronyms you're going to be tacking on to most things are either CDL, which is cracked, damaged, or loose, and ABC, abrasions, bumps, or cuts. ABC is going to pertain to anything with rubber, so the tires, hoses, belts, things of that nature. Everyone, you need to study the entire truck. He might have you do a partial pre-trip, but you never know if you're going to have to do the entire truck. And just be as thorough as possible. That's the biggest key. The whole point of this exercise is to do it one time. You pass it, and you don't have to think about it again. So we're going to start out on the driver's side. Put up. So we're going to start with a general overview. We're looking for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts on any of the hoses, any obvious leaks, anything obviously wrong. So if we looked in here and we saw a bunch of shiny metal, that's just something is weird to us. It's kind of what we're looking for. So our general overview, we're looking for any obvious things that are wrong. So on this side of the engine, you need to point out the engine components, the drive belt, and a couple other things. Up on top here, we have the AC compressor. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose, securely mounted. Below that is our alternator here. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose. We are looking for any damage, any burnt wiring or chafed wiring. Way down on the bottom here, there's a blue pulley. That is our water pump. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose, and it is not leaking any fluid. All these accessories are belt driven. The belt does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and we are looking for no more than 3/4 of an inch of free play. If you go into more detail than that, you won't get docked. It's better to go into more detail than you really need to. Again, the whole point is do it one time. Our radiator and charge air cooler are securely mounted, not damaged, not leaking any fluid. That takes care of the driver's side of the engine compartment. On the driver's side of the engine compartment, we're going to start out again with a general overview. Any hoses, abrasions, bumps, or cuts, any fluid leaks, anything obviously dangling off or just that appears incorrect. We need to point out our coolant reservoir, not cracked, damaged, or loose. The coolant is in the proper operating level here. Our cap is tight, not leaking any coolant. We've got our power steering pump fluid here. It's not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any fluid. As long as it's within the proper operating range here, we're good to go. We have our engine oil fill and dipstick here. We would check that, we would pull it out, wipe it off, jam it back in, make sure it's within the proper operating range. On the test, you won't actually need to do that or grab onto any components. You just need to tell them what you're looking for. Other engine components we need to point out are right down in here. We have a copper line that leads to our air compressor. It is securely mounted, not cracked, damaged, or leaking. And on the back side of that is our power steering pump, which is also not cracked, damaged, loose, or leaking. Both of these components are gear driven. You need to tell them that. Windshield washer fluid reservoir here, not cracked, damaged, loose, or leaking. And we we've got some fluid in there, so that way when we go to test our wipers and washers, we have some fluid to do that with. That's the engine on this side. For the remainder, you can do whatever order you want. It doesn't particularly matter, but you must cover all the components. I like to work system by system, so I will do this. I usually do the steering system, and then my frame and suspension, and then my brakes, and then my rims and tires. Doesn't matter what order you do it, as long as you cover everything. Starting out with the steering system, we have our steering shaft here. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose. I'm looking for no more than 10 degrees of free play. I have my U-joint right here. Not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's got plenty of grease in there. My power steering gearbox. Not cracked, damaged, or loose. Not leaking any fluid. 3-piece steering linkage. Not cracked, damaged, or loose. I have casting nuts and cotter pins in place here. The last piece for the steering system is on the back side of the axle. I have my tie rod. That is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Casting nuts and cotter pins are in place. Steering system is complete. So now I will go to the frame and suspension. The frame, everything that I can see of the frame, I don't see any cracks or illegal welds or signs of missing hardware. I have my front spring hanger mount, not cracked, damaged, or loose. I have my leaf springs, not cracked, damaged, or loose. No broken springs, no shifted springs. Right down in the center, I have my U-bolts, not cracked, damaged, or loose. I'm looking for shiny areas, which indicates something is loose and rubbing. My front axle beam, not cracked, damaged, or loose, and no illegal welds. There's a rear spring hanger mount in there. If you can point that out, it's hard to see because of the fender in the way in the back, on the back side of the springs. So that takes care of this front suspension. Oop, almost forgot. Shock absorber, top mount and bottom mount, securely mounted, not cracked, damaged, or loose, and it's not leaking any fluid. Now the suspension system is taken care of, so now I will go on to brakes. Coming out of the frame, I have my rubber airline, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. That goes to my brake chamber, which is not cracked, damaged, or loose. When I do my applied leak down tests, I'll make sure that that's not leaking any air. Right here is my push rod and slack adjuster. They're not cracked, damaged, or loose. And with the brakes release, if I were to pull on that, I'd be looking for no more than 1 inch of free play. Now we come to the parts of the brake system that we can't see very well because there are some dust shields in the way. So there's a brake drum and brake pads in here. Like I said, you can't see them very well, so you're just going to tell them what you're looking for. The brake drum is not cracked, damaged, or does not have any illegal welds, and the brake pads are not cracked, damaged, or loose. You need to tell them that there's at least 1/4 inch of material on them and that they are not soaked in oil. Front brake system has been completed. Now on to rims and tires. Inside rim, there is no damage. Inside tire is properly beaded to the rim. The inside sidewall does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Top of the tire does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. It is evenly worn. Got to look for 4/32 of tread depth. The outside sidewall does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. It is properly beaded to the rim. The rim does not have any cracks or damage or illegal welds. All of our lug nuts are tight and not missing. I'd be looking for any rust streaks or metal shavings. That would indicate that something is loose. Underneath this is going to be my hub oil seal. Just tell them that it's not leaking any oil. My valve stem and cap right here, not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any air. The front tires need to be at least 100 psi, and the phrase the DOT wants to hear is that you're going to check it with a gauge. That phrase needs to be said. So this concludes the engine compartment. So now we will move on down the side of the truck. Starting out with our mirrors, nothing is cracked, damaged, or loose. Nothing's hanging off the truck. We don't see any obvious damage. I'm going to open the door. The hinges work properly. The door works properly. Point out that the weather stripping is in place, not missing. You can point out the fire extinguisher right now. So we need a 10-pound BC or better fire extinguisher, and it is mounted securely to the floor and fully charged. Fuel tank and step area. So the steps are not cracked, damaged, or loose. You jump up on them, you're not going to fall off. Our tank straps are not cracked, damaged, or loose. Our frame mounts are not cracked, damaged, or loose. The tank itself is not leaking any fluid. Tell him that the cap has got a safety chain or a retaining chain on the cap, and that there's a rubber seal in there. Back of the cab, we're looking for any obvious damage. Reflective tape on the back of the window. The window is pretty clean. We can look out the back window. We have our exhaust system there. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Nothing's hanging off. Looking for leaks, I would be looking for any holes in the pipe or soot around any of the joints. Again, just going to do system by system. So I'm going to do my airlines and then work kind of down the rest of the truck. Once again, doesn't matter what order you do it, as long as you cover every component. So on the tractor side for my airlines, I'm looking for abrasions, bumps, or cuts. And with my applied leak down tests later on, no air leaks. The airlines themselves don't have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not dragging on the catwalk where they could get snagged on something. On the trailer side here, we have our glad hands. Tell them that you will pull them off and check for the rubber seals inside. Make sure that they're not torn or leaking any air. Our electrical plug-in, tell him that you will pull that out and look inside there. Make sure that there's no bent or broken pins and no corrosion. We have our catwalk and catwalk steps here, securely mounted to the frame. Our battery box cover, battery box steps, those are also securely mounted. Inside the battery compartments, tell them that the batteries are securely mounted, they are not leaking any acid, and they don't have a bunch of corrosion on the top of the terminals. Our steps here are not cracked, damaged, or loose. They're kind of bent up, but they're still safe to stand on, and they're not going to fall off while we're going down the road. We have our air tanks down here, not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any air. All of our airlines to and from those do not have abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and are not leaking any air. Right in the center of the truck, we have our drive shaft. It is not bent, broken, or damaged. The U-joints have got plenty of grease in them. Do the fifth wheel coupling system, and then again just work system by system. So I'm going to do the coupling system, and then the suspension, then brakes, then rims and tires. So the trailer side is called the apron. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose. The phrase the DOT wants to hear on this is that it's nice and flat. Right here is our skid plate. That does not have any cracks or damage. It is also nice and flat. We don't see any gap between the two components, which indicates that everything should be latched properly. Our release arm is tight to the plate, which also indicates that things should be latched properly. To double check that, we would go around the back of the truck, look up into the back of the fifth wheel and make sure that the jaws are latched around the kingpin. You don't actually do that on the test, you just tell them what you're doing, what you would do. Finishing off the fifth wheel system, we have our pedestal mounts and hardware. Nothing is cracked, damaged, or loose, and there is no missing hardware. Suspension on the rear. This is air ride, so we have our front frame mount. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Down to our eye bolt and control arm. Those are not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's kind of tough to see in some of the components here. Most of it's going to be through memory. So we have our control arm here. So now we're going to go around to the back, and hopefully you can see a little bit better here. Okay. So right here where the control arm meets the U-bolt or drive axle, we have more U-bolts. They're not cracked, damaged, or loose. We'd be looking for metal shavings or shiny areas indicating something is loose or rubbing. Right here we have our airbag. Top plate and bottom plate are not cracked, damaged, or loose. The airbag itself does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and is not leaking any air. We have our shock absorbers. Top mount and bottom mount are on here securely. The shocks are not cracked, damaged, or loose, and not leaking any fluid. We have our torque rod here that goes from the top of the axle to the frame. That is not cracked, damaged, or loose. And since we're back here, you can see right here that the jaws are properly latched around the kingpin. We have no gap. We have plenty of grease in here, so that way it doesn't bind while we're turning. The rear drive axle is not cracked, damaged, or loose, and it is not leaking any fluid on the ground. Now we need to go back around to the front where we can see the brake components. The brakes for the rest of the truck will be pretty much the same as on the steer axle. The only difference is that they are parking brake chambers, so there will be 2 air lines per chamber. Let's go around to the other side. Since the quarter fender is out of the way on this side, it's really easy to see. So we have our 2 air lines going to the chamber. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and not leaking any air. Our brake chamber is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Not leaking any air. On the back side, it's kind of hard to see, but it's just like on the front. Push rod and slack adjuster are not cracked, damaged, or loose. And with the brakes released, we'd be looking for no more than 1 inch of free play. Out to the wheel end, where we have our brake drum and brake pads. The brake drum is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Doesn't have any illegal welds. The brake pads are not cracked, damaged, or loose. They need to have at least a quarter inch of material on them and are not soaked in oil. The tires on the back and the trailer is basically just running through the steer tire 2 times over, with just adding a couple of extra things. So, inside rim, no damage. Inside tire, properly beaded to the rim. Inside tire sidewall, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Top of the tire, 2 30-seconds, tread depth. Inside sidewall, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Inside rim, not cracked, damaged, or loose. There's no debris between the duals, which could fly out and cause an issue, or cause a flat tire. Outside tire, the rim doesn't have any damage. It is properly beaded to the rim. Inside sidewall, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Top of the tire, 2 30-seconds tread depth. Outside tire, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts on the sidewall. Properly beaded to the rim. The rim does not have any cracks or damage or illegal welds. All the lug nuts are tight and in place. The axle seal is not leaking any fluid. And both of our valve stems and caps are not cracked, damaged, or loose, or leaking any air. The tires are at 100 pounds, and once again, the phrase they want to hear is we're going to check it with a gauge. Back around to the other side. So we have our quarter fender here, not cracked, damaged, or loose, securely mounted, it's not rubbing on anything. On the back side, we have our mud flaps, not cracked, damaged, or loose, nothing's going to fall off while we're going down the road, and these aren't dragging on the ground. On the back of the tractor, we have our lights, which we will check before we go inside the cab. If he says, tell me about the tractor from the windshield back to the drive tires, that is what we just covered. Now we need to finish off with the trailer. So the entire front of the trailer is called the header board. We are looking for any obvious damage to that. Nobody's run into anything with the trailer. Nobody's come through the inside with a forklift. The entire side of the trailer now will say the same thing. We're looking for any obvious damage, things of that nature. This is a side skirt or frame rail, whichever you prefer. Tell them that it's not cracked, damaged, or loose. On this particular trailer, we have some corrosion damage, but it's not to the point where we need to pull this trailer out of service. Reflective tape runs at least half the length of the vehicle and is in working condition. As we walk along the trailer, on the bottom here are going to be cross members. You just tell them that they're all, none of them are cracked, damaged, or loose. They're all properly mounted. Our landing gear here, not cracked, damaged, or loose. It is in the transport position. The handle is stowed. And you tell them that there's plenty of room between the frame rails and the landing gears, that way when you start turning, nothing gets damaged. Moving along the side of the trailer, the rear axle and components are going to be pretty much the same as on the drive axle. So we just need to, so here's our air tank for the trailer. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any air. Our air lines going to each brake chamber do not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. They're not leaking any air. Our brake chambers down here are not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any air. Rear suspension, the stub frame, it's not cracked, damaged, or loose, not rusted apart. Front suspension mount, not cracked, damaged, or loose. Control arm here is not cracked, damaged, or loose. Right at the axle here are more U-bolts, not cracked, damaged, or loose. No shiny areas or metal shavings indicating something is loose and rubbing. On the inside here you can see the shock absorber. Somewhere in there. Right here. The shock absorber, properly mounted top and bottom, not cracked, damaged, or loose, and not leaking any fluid. Our airbag here, we have our top plate and bottom plate, not cracked, damaged, or loose. The airbag does not have abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and is not leaking any air. Going to go over the tires right away. Inside rim, no damage. Properly muted to the rim. Inside sidewall, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. The tire here, 2 30-seconds to tread depth.
I left there 2 weekends ago and 45 the weight high.
Sidewall, no abrasions, bumps, or cuts. Properly muted to the rim. No damage to the rim. No debris between the rims, between the tires, which could cause a flat or cause another issue.
It's 6 now. I would say I fucking nailed it, right?
Outside rim, no damage. Properly muted to the rim. Properly muted to the rim. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts on the sidewall. 2 30-seconds.
Down here, you tried to pass the semi, white Ford.
No, I'm white GMC.
2 30-seconds for the tread depth. No abrasions, bumps, or cuts on the sidewall. Properly muted to the rim. The rim does not have any damage. All the lug nuts are in place. We'd be looking for rust streaks or metal shavings. The hub axle oil seal is not leaking any fluid. We have our ABS light here. When we turn the key on for the first time, it should turn on, then turn off. If it comes on, stays on, there's a problem. If it doesn't come on at all, there's a problem. Mud flaps, not going to fall off going down the road. They're not dragging on the ground. Got a few things to finish off on the brakes back here. Gotta come at it from the bottom. So we have our push rod and slack adjuster here. Not cracked, damaged, or loose. With the brakes released, we'd be looking for no more than 1 inch of free play. Out to the wheel end here, we have our brake drums. Not cracked, damaged, or loose. No illegal welds. Our brake pads, not cracked, damaged, or loose. We have at least 1/4 inch of material here, and they are not soaked in oil. That covers the brakes and suspension on the trailer. So there's just a couple more things to point out here. Our rear bumper, it's not cracked, damaged, or loose. It's got reflective tape in there. Somebody rear ends us, they will not end up underneath the trailer. The rear door operates properly and will contain any cargo that comes up against it. At this point, now we're going to check all of our exterior lights before we go inside the cab. So we can start out by turning on the low beams and the hazards. You just walk them around the truck and point out that the lights are working, our low beams are working, our hazards are working. Kind of hard to see in the daylight here, but the clearance lights are all working properly. They're the proper color. You can see on the back of the tractor, those lights are working properly. As on the back. Tail lights are working properly, the hazards are working properly. Now at this point, you will have him help you check the remaining lights. You'll go up in the cab and call out what you're looking for. Left turn, right turn, stop lights on the back. On the front, left turn, right turn, and high beam. So we'll do that now, and then just, as I call them out, just tell me if they're working or not. Left turn,
Yep.
right turn,
Yep.
brakes.
Yep.
Now come around to the front. To make sure that the high beams work properly, you will need to have the key in the front position. Left turn,
Yep.
right turn,
Yep.
high beam.
Yep.
Okay, come up into the cab. So now that we are in the cab, just need to finish off. Basically, you're going to act like you're a salesperson and point out all the amenities of the semi-tractor. So starting out, our glass and mirrors are all clear. We don't have any stone chips or cracks in our direct field of vision. Make sure that our seat belts don't have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and that they latch properly. Other safety equipment we need to point out is our breakdown triangles and spare fuses. There are 3 breakdown triangles. Tell them that it's properly mounted to the floor. The floor is clear of any debris. Don't have any pop cans that are going to roll up underneath the pedals and cause us to rear end somebody, as in the case of John Knopf and Craig Setz. Beautiful. So, things we need to point out in the dash. The first time that we turn the key on, our dash, all of our warning lights turn on, then turn off. Particularly the ABS light. If it comes on, stays on, that's a problem. Doesn't come on at all, that's a problem. Need to show that the left turn indicator works, the right turn indicator works, and the high beams work. Other things we need to point out with the gauges. So our coolant temperature, when we go up to test, that is in the proper operating range. Below that's our oil pressure. With the engine running, as long as it's reading something and the alarms aren't going off, that is correct. Tachometer here responds. The speedometer, we will check that when we do our brake test. Fuel gauge, we have plenty of fuel for the road test. We're not going to run out halfway through the trip. Volt gauge, as long as it's within the green, we're fine. And the air gauges, as long as those are reading properly. Need to show them that the wipers work, and then separately the washers work. So those are working properly. Our horns, we have our city horn and our air horn. Heater defroster, turn that on. Make sure that it blows air on the windshield. Does that, you're good to go. We have now pointed out all the necessary components in the truck. These are accessory switches. You don't need to go into that on the test. Now we come to the part of the test that you must do 100% correct. Usually if somebody fails the pre-trip, they mess up on this part of the test. State of Wisconsin goes by the acronym LAB, the lab test, where we are checking for applied air leaks, making sure that our low air alarms come on, and that our emergency buttons pop out. So we're going to start out with make sure that the truck builds up air pressure until it cuts out. To make it go faster, we can run the RPM up some. So the truck has reached cutout pressure for the air system. So now I'm going to turn off the engine, but then turn it back to the run position so that way the gauges and alarms work properly. Next, I will make sure that both buttons are pushed in. And ideally, we wouldn't be rolling away. So, full pressure, engine's off, keys back on. Both buttons are in. First step, full brake application, hold it for 1 full minute. Make sure we're not losing more than 4 pounds in 1 minute. And then just start counting down. 1, 2, 3, 4. As long as you're doing it correctly, he will not make you wait 1 full minute. He will say, okay, what is our next step? The next step is A, for alarms. So we're going to fan the brakes until the alarm system comes on, which will happen right in the 60 to 70 pound range. The alarms are working properly. So now we will keep pumping the brakes until both buttons pop out. That should occur somewhere in the 20 to 45 pound range. The numbers that I'm throwing out here, 4 pounds in a minute, 60 to 70 pounds for the alarms, 20 to 45 pounds for the buttons. You need to know that and tell them this. Both buttons have popped out. So we have successfully completed the leak alarm button test. So now we can restart the engine and build up air pressure. For rebuilding air pressure, I always like to push the trailer brake air supply back in. Push the trailer air supply in right away because we pull out a lot of air when we're doing our tests and it takes a long time for the system to recharge. Bring it up to high idle and that'll get the air building up faster. So our next step is going to be checking for the parking brakes. once I have adequate air in the system, I'm going to have one button in and one button out. I'm going to put it in gear and tug against the parking brakes and make sure that the truck doesn't go anywhere. Then I will switch buttons, do the same. It tells me our parking brakes are working. So one button in, one button out. Put it in gear. We don't move. Do the same thing. So now we're going to check for the service brakes. I'm going to push both buttons in, roll ahead about 5 miles an hour, and hold the steering wheel loosely. I'm going to step on the brakes real hard and just make sure that the steering wheel does not jerk one way or the other and that the brakes are working properly. Our speedometer is working. And brace yourself. Told you. So that is all working properly. At this point, if you have done everything correctly, he will ask you, well, actually, at the end of the pre-trip, he will ask you, are you finished? When you say yes, that is the end. If you have missed something that you were supposed to work on, that's it. He will then score you, tell you what you might have missed, and then, with any luck, he will then explain what you need to do for the backing system test. And that's the entire pre-trip. Takes a lot of time to get used to. This took a lot longer than normal because we slowed down and kind of explained things a little bit more thoroughly than we usually do. When you get a rhythm down, you can do it. I think we're at 25 minutes, 27 minutes. If you get a good rhythm down, 15 to 20 minutes, you can have the whole thing taken care of. And just just go over it again and again and again and again, because the entire point is to do the test one time. Alright, so this is the supplement to the pre-trip video. This is for people going through on a manual. There are a few differences between the automatics and the manuals. Not many, that's why we're doing this. The biggest things are going to be engine layout and then the fifth wheel system. Engine layout on this side. So we start out again with our general overview, looking for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts on any hoses, any obvious fluid leaks, any damage there. Components on this side are going to be our AC compressor here, and down below that is our alternator. Neither of those are cracked, damaged, or loose. They're securely mounted. The wiring doesn't have any damage to it. It's not burnt up. These are belt-driven accessories. The belt does not have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts. We are looking for no more than 3/4 of an inch of free play. Turbo doesn't have any damage. Windshield washer fluid is here. We have enough windshield washer fluid to make sure that they are working properly. Radiator charge air cooler are not cracked, damaged, or loose, or leaking any fluid. We will go around to the other side. Here we have our coolant reservoir, not cracked, damaged, or loose. Securely mounted. The coolant is in the proper operating range here. General overview. We're looking for any abrasions, bumps, or cuts on hoses, any obvious fluid leaks. We have our dipstick here. Pull it out, wipe it off, jam it back in, make sure it's within the operating range. The oil fill is right up top here. Right in here is our water pump, which is belt driven. It is not cracked, damaged, or loose, or leaking any fluid. Our other components, our air compressor and our power steering pump on these engines is way in the back here. Way in the back by the bell housing, you can't see it very well at all. You just tell them that those are not cracked, damaged, or loose, or leaking fluid, and that those are both belt-driven accessories. Sorry, gear-driven accessories. Very critical difference. Power steering fluid here. No leaks. It is within the proper operating range. And that is all you need to, those are the differences between the automatic and the manual. The steering components are all the same. Frame, suspension, brakes, rims, and tires are all going to be the same. Side of the tractor is going to be the same. These newer trucks, we got a depth tank, securely mounted, not leaking any fluid. Other than that, the fuel tanks are all going to be the same. Okay, the cab will be the same, exhaust will be the same. Frame, rear suspension, rims, brakes, and tires are all going to be the same. What's a little different than the automatic, but everything is pretty much the same. These tractors, the battery box is right in the center of the frame here underneath this cover. Just tell them that it's securely mounted. You would be looking for leaking batteries or corrosion on the terminals. The cab air ride is a little different. We have our shock absorbers here. Top mount, bottom mount, not cracked, damaged, or loose, not leaking any fluid. Our airbags, not cracked, damaged, or loose. The mounting plates, they don't have any abrasions, bumps, or cuts, and they're not leaking any air. So the main difference is going to be in the fifth wheel system here. So we have our plate here, which is nice and flat, plenty of grease. The release arm is the same as on the other truck. The big difference though is that this is a sliding fifth wheel system. So components we're going to point out is our skid plate is not cracked, damaged, or loose, nice and flat. All of our mounting hardware is not cracked, damaged, or loose. The sliding frame rails are securely mounted, not cracked, damaged, or loose. The locking pins are properly engaged so that while we're driving around, the fifth wheel doesn't slide back and forth. Along with that is going to be the release for those pins. The airline isn't damaged. We don't have any air leaks on that. And to be honest, those are the key differences between the automatic and the manual. The engine layout and the way the fifth wheel sits. Other than that, a little different look, but all the main components are going to be the same. So let's just go up in the cab quick. As on the other truck, you're basically going to be a salesperson here. So we turn our key on. All the warning indicators in the gauge cluster turn on then off, particularly the ABS light. Comes on and stays on, there's a problem. Doesn't come on at all, there's a problem. Indicators, left turn, right turn, and high beam. Our glass and mirrors are all clean. No stone chips or cracks in the glass. Wipers work. Washers work. On the Freightliners, We have our city horn and our air horn. Gauges to point out. So we have our oil pressure here with the engine running, as long as it's reading something and no alarms are going off, that's proper. Below that is our coolant temperature gauge. It'll be in the proper operating range. We have our fuel gauge and depth gauge. We have plenty of fuel for our trip. We won't run out halfway through. Our air gauges are reading properly. Our voltmeter on these is right in the gauge cluster here, right beneath the odometer. It says 12.3 volts. If there were an issue, that would come on. As on the other tractor, heater defroster, switch it all over, give it a few seconds, it will turn on. Make sure that it blows air on the windshield. So we have our interaxle differential lock, our fifth wheel slider controls, and our air suspension dump. Things that you should know before you operate the truck, and things that are good to know or good to point out on the pre-trip. So we're going to do a safe start, clutch all the way down, lightly apply the brakes so we don't roll anywhere. Make sure the truck is in neutral. So the tachometer works. And then when we do the leak alarm button test in the manual, you will, once you shut the truck down, you will put it in gear so that way it doesn't roll away. Other than that, the same procedure applies. Fully charge the air system. Turn the key off, but then turn the engine off, key on, so that way the gauges read properly. You're going to push both buttons in, and then you will do a full brake application. Press and hold for 1 minute, no more than 4 pounds in 1 minute of leak down. Then you're going to fan the brakes. The alarm should come on in the 60 to 70 pound range. And then you're going to keep pumping the brakes until in the 25 to 45 pound range, both buttons need to pop out here. Once you complete that, then you're going to pull it back into neutral, start the truck and build up air pressure again. Doing your tug tests, 1 button in, 1 button out, put it in gear, and just tug against it. Don't let the clutch out entirely, otherwise you'll kill the truck and look like a fool. Switch buttons, do the same thing. Then for your service brake check, both buttons in, roll ahead about 5 miles an hour, clutch in, and then jab the brakes hard. Make sure that it doesn't jerk the wheel one way or the other. And those are the differences between the manual and the automatic pre-trip.